Technique, I just want to know, what do you think is happening right now in the country in terms of the Occupy Wall Street movement? Do you think it's something that there's going to be a lot of big changes going on, a revolution perhaps?
It depends on what your definition of revolution is. If it's blood in the streets and the royal family being murdered, I don't know if that's necessarily going to happen, but I think what is definitely going to continue to transpire is more and more people realizing just how disenfranchised they are. They're realizing just how little control they have over their own democracy. So they would want to give more of a voice to that. I also think what's happening is mirrored in other parts of the world, where people are just so opposed to the use of centralized power, of a federal system that's so in control of a state system. But yet they want it to be more efficient. So they've almost surrendered their freedom to a more efficient government, similar to what Russia will have to deal with when they decide whether Putin's going to come back into power. There are a lot of people that think, oh, functionality over the visage of democracy that exists there. So I think the entire world is really dealing with that now. Will it be oligarchy, autocratic regime that's more functional because it's backed by corporations, or more of a democratic regime that could be hit and miss on certain things, may take a hit on jobs? You know, these are very personal things to people because they exemplify how we choose to live as human beings, but also are personal because they are the day-to-day functionality of life.
All right, so you say it's about functionality, simplicity, but you've also said that we constantly have to keep working upon our democracy, right? It's something that's never going to be finished. Revolution is never going to be finished. But so what happened there?
It's about functionality and simplicity, but I mean, essentially people all want the same things. I mean, and like I said before, it's not the same exact thing. I mean, people just want affordable health care, you know? They want to be able to live in a house that's not going to be repossessed illegally by some people who give out predatory loans. It's just the amount of things, the amount of abuse that Americans have had to deal with from the banking system is just obscene.
But I'm just wondering what it is that allowed them to let it get to this point. You know, why did we let it get so far? Why did it get to the point where the power is in the hands of so few, where the wealth gap is so incredibly large here in this country?
Funny story, it exemplifies why it got this far. My father had a colleague of his, a friend of his, that came to America before the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he walked around his supermarket and he goes, I get it now. He goes, this is just wheat and sugar. Said, but in Russia, the USSR, all we have is the same color box, wheat and sugar, for 100 aisles. In America, you have wheat and sugar with a tiger on the cover. And then the other one has a frog on the cover. And the other one has a charm at the bottom and a gift, a special gift. The idea of America is to give democracy and freedom to people, but I think that now more than ever, it's become about placating people and about pacifying them so they don't ask for the amount of freedom that they're guaranteed. Almost like when police stop you and they're offended that you seem to know your rights. That happens more and more. I mean, even you want to make this entirely about Occupy Wall Street, we can. Even the people that are down at each and every single Occupy Wall Street that are sitting there quoting the law, that have legal teams, they still see their civil rights being cut at every single corner. They still see excuses left and right. Oh, we want to clean the park, so we're going to have to move everyone out, and then we're going to let you back in. Oh, you know, they were rioting and the protesters got violent. Well, maybe because you shot them with rubber bullets and you threw tear gas at them. You know, at some point, there needs to be some accountability, not just from the protesters, but also from the police reaction to things like that, you know?
And we've seen a lot of those police reactions lately, specifically in Oakland and other countries across the U.S. as well. Do you think that our police aren't trained to deal with peaceful protests? They only know how to suppress, how to use militarized tactics?
I think they thought that they could shove them off with a hard push, but when they realized that it wasn't going to be that easy, I've seen different cities take different action. We were just at Occupy Charlottesville, and really the police seemed to back off a little bit more than I'd seen them in New York. There were porta potties set up for people. You know, different regions, different cities are dealing with different problems. So in a city like New York, where you have a population of 8 million and a migrating population that comes to work of another couple of million, and probably explain why there's 1,000 more cops, why they're concerned with rioting. But my answer to that has always been, listen, if we were 20,000 deep right then and there, we could have torn downtown to pieces, but we didn't. When you were macing women in the street, we could have ripped the village limb from limb, but we didn't. Because we don't hate America. We love America, and we want to see it become a better place. Because people are out there sleeping out in the cold because of a belief that maybe if they lead by example and they say, you know, I'm willing to stay here in the streets, I'm willing to continue to be a voice for what's supposed to be democracy, what's supposed to be a representative democracy, then maybe that letter that I wrote to my senator, or that letter I wrote to my congressman, that their underpaid aid gotten threw off somewhere, or overpaid aid threw off and got somewhere that never got to them, maybe this is the only way that they can hear me.
But I'm wondering if you think that the Occupy Wall Street movement, if it wants to go somewhere, if it's going to need leaders, if it's going to need a specific face for people to identify with.
You bring up an interesting point. I think the very beginning of the movement, there were no ever-present leaders because people were afraid that the movement would simply be decapitated from the very head, or use that individual as leverage against other people that were just as powerful in the movement. So what they wanted to do was at first have no centralized leadership that could be attacked and picked off. And then later on, they were, as far as I know, electing people that were going to be spokespersons for specific issues. Like now they have a general assembly, then they have an assembly about race, you know, about other simple issues that can be put into writing in a few sentences, but that require a lot of communication, because as educated as the left may be sometimes about class, I think that there's still a huge conversation to have there about race relations, which is incredibly important, because it's always kind of the independent variable that's left out of the equation sometimes when we talk about revolution in this country.
What do you think Obama is to this movement? Because Occupy Wall Street is supposed to be nonpartisan, right? It's supposed to be the 99% versus the 1%, but it is, for the meantime, mostly a left movement. And do you think that Obama is actually inhibiting it in some way? Because now you have the left, which is split on their opinion over Obama, whether they're going to go out and vote for him in 2012 or continue resisting, trying to go along with something new.
The Republicans are going to probably pick Romney. He's not going to beat Obama. Obama is 10 times the campaigner that he is the president. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as a compliment to you, Mr. President, because you can just say anything and they'll buy it and they'll believe it. You know, if we had invaded Libya, and if we had decided to intervene in all these other countries under a different president, under a Republican, under McCain, this country was ready to go up in flames over the fact that we had been dragged into wars that people thought were unnecessary, that this economic system had collapsed, that trillions of dollars were being given. So when he came in with the idea that he was going to reform things. And when that was not met, when the criteria that he set up himself for what the reform would entail was not completed, I don't think that created the Occupy Wall Street movement, but it definitely added fuel to the fire. What
to you is the biggest broken promise from Obama, or, you know, what makes you the most disappointed in him? Something that he didn't do? It's not a question of disappointed or him breaking a promise that, you know, emotionally scarred me somehow. I think when you follow politics for a while, you realize the difference in between what people promise and what they deliver. And also, I think there was a little bit of either manufactured or genuine naivety about the whole thing. Shutting down Guantanamo, I kind of knew from the beginning that that wasn't going to happen. But at the same time, everybody else had some kind of hope that he would come in and usher an era of peace. And yet, for his first term, he's been a very, very hawkish war president, which is what I think is going to make it very difficult for the Republicans to come up against him. Well, let's talk about the responses we see here from politicians, from pundits. When there's a revolution in Tunisia or in Egypt, it's the people's fight for democracy, right? It's a push for democracy, the Arab Spring. When the same thing is happening here, they're anti-capitalist and they're anti-freedom. Why? I think we all know the answer to that question. You know, when someone has a revolution in some part of the world and it benefits American companies and they're given access to the natural resources, the subsidiary companies that own the press,
that own the news stations, that own papers, spin it in a nice way. When it's something in which we lose access to natural resources, then it becomes the worst of the worst. Then it is absolute terrorism. Now, when it is someone that is not beneficial to giving us access to natural resources, but we can't really afford to toy with them, like China, then we tread lightly around our human rights criticism.
All right, Immortal Technique, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me here.